I walked out of the gas station holding a cup of burnt coffee, already annoyed at how long the stop had taken. The desert air hit me first. Too quiet, too still. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, but warns you. I scanned the parking lot once, then twice. The SUV was gone, not moved to another spot, not circling around the building, gone. The space where it had been parked looked like it had never been occupied at all. My suitcase, my purse, my wallet, my medications, everything I had brought for this trip had vanished with them. But then I saw my cane, still leaning against the bench where Jenna had told me to sit before I went inside. And that was when the truth settled in. Because Jenna noticed everything. She would never leave something behind by accident. That cane was not forgotten. It was released. The way you release something you no longer need. They didn't forget me. They left me. I pressed my hands slowly against the lining of my cardigan and felt the small, hard shape hidden inside the stitching. A phone. A prepaid phone my husband had insisted I keep years ago, sewn into the fabric where no one would think to look. You should have known better, I whispered to myself. And maybe I should have. But to understand how I ended up alone in that parking lot standing in the Arizona heat at 67 years old with nothing but a cane and a secret phone, you need to understand everything that came before it. Every warning I ignored, every silence I chose over truth, every moment I told myself that love alone was enough to hold a family together. My husband Henry built everything we had with patience and precision. He worked in property management for decades in Texas, slowly acquiring small rental properties, investing carefully and documenting every single transaction with a thoroughness that sometimes drove me out of my mind. Every receipt had a folder. Every account had a backup. Every password was written down in a system only he and I understood. There were layers within layers, and he maintained all of them without complaint. Henry was the kind of man who believed in preparation, not paranoia, preparation. He used to sit across from me at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, and say, "Life doesn't fall apart all at once. Maggie, it slips, one small decision at a time. You don't notice until you're already standing in the middle of the mess." I would laugh and tell him he worried too much. Now I understand he didn't worry enough. When Henry got sick, really sick, the kind of sick that doesn't get better, he didn't just prepare for dying. He prepared for what would come after. One evening near the end, he sat me down in the living room. His hands were thinner than I had ever seen them, the skin almost translucent under the lamplight. He looked at me with the steady, serious expression he reserved for the things that mattered most. "I'm not leaving you unprotected, Maggie," he said. "But protection only works if you don't hand it away." At the time, I thought he meant strangers, scammers, the outside world. I didn't realize he might have been talking about something much closer. Ryan was our only child. When he was little, he was gentle and thoughtful in ways that made my heart ache with tenderness. He would pick dandelions from the yard and bring them to me, cupped in both hands like they were something precious. "These are special flowers, Mom," he would say, completely serious. And I would put them in a glass of water on the kitchen counter and tell him they were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. Henry adored him. I did too. He was our whole world in many ways. But as Ryan grew older, something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way cracks form in a wall you stop looking at. He struggled in ways he never talked about. Jobs came and went. Confidence rose and fell. He always had big ideas, always chasing something just out of reach. But the reach kept getting longer and the ideas kept getting more expensive. Henry helped him more than once. Paid off a credit card here, Co-signed a loan there, but always with conditions, always with documentation. Help should never become a habit, Henry would say. I didn't always agree. I thought he was too hard on Ryan sometimes, too structured, too demanding. When Ryan was 28, he opened an auto repair shop with a friend. Henry lent him $15,000 and drew up a handwritten contract. Repayment dates, interest rate, a clause about forfeiture if payments were missed. I told Henry it was too formal for family. He said formality was how you kept family honest. 6 months later, the shop failed. Ryan came to the house one evening, dropped the keys on the kitchen table without looking at either of us, and said, "It's done." Henry didn't raise his voice, didn't lecture. He just asked, "What did you learn?" Ryan didn't answer. He walked into his old bedroom and closed the door. That night, lying in bed, I heard something through the wall, quiet, muffled, unmistakable. Ryan was crying. I put my hand on the doorknob of his room. I stood there for what felt like a long time, and then I walked away. I told myself he needed space, privacy, dignity. Now I wonder if what he needed was for someone to open that door. I wonder if my choice to leave it closed became a pattern, one I repeated too many times, softening consequences, smoothing over failures, calling it love when maybe it was something else entirely. When Ryan married Jenna, I wanted so badly for things to stabilize. Jenna was polished, organized, confident in ways Ryan wasn't. She had a degree in business. She dressed well. She spoke clearly. At first, I thought she would be exactly what he needed. And maybe in some ways she was. But Jenna had a particular way of occupying space. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make scenes. She simply decided things and expected everyone else to follow along. I noticed it in small moments at first. The way she would answer questions directed at Ryan before he could open his mouth. The way she managed their finances, their calendar, even their conversations. At family dinners, Ryan would glance at her before speaking, checking whether his words had been approved. I told myself every marriage has its rhythm, its balance. Then Sophie was born, my granddaughter. And that child brought light into my life in a way I didn't know I was missing. She was curious from the very beginning, the kind of baby who studied everything with wide, serious eyes before deciding whether to smile. As she grew, she became my companion. She would sit beside me for hours in the kitchen, asking questions about recipes, about why bread rises, about why the sky changes color at sunset. She noticed things other people missed and asked about them without embarrassment. I helped raise her more than anyone ever said out loud. When Ryan lost a job, I stepped in with groceries. When Jenna wanted to focus on her career, I babysat 3 days a week. When bills piled up, I quietly covered what I could without making a show of it. That is what family does, I told myself. You show up, you support, you give. But giving has a way of becoming invisible when it's expected. Sophie's 10th birthday was the first time I felt something I couldn't name. I had baked a cake from my mother's recipe, 3 layers decorated by hand the way I had done for Ryan when he was young. I spent 2 days on it. When I arrived at the party and carried it inside, I saw that Jenna had already ordered a cake from an upscale bakery downtown. It sat in the center of the table, tall and perfect, with Sophie's name written in elegant cursive across the top. My cake was placed on the counter near the back of the kitchen. No one mentioned it, no one cut it, except Sophie. At some point during the party, she slipped away from her friends and cut a slice of both cakes. She ate my cake first. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. On the drive home that evening, I sat in my car in the driveway for 5 minutes before turning off the engine. I wasn't crying, I was just sitting, trying to understand something I wasn't ready to name. When Henry passed, everything changed, not all at once, but enough. At first, Ryan was attentive. He called more often, checked in, made sure I wasn't alone too much. Jenna even came by with meals during those first few weeks, and I remember thinking maybe grief would bring us closer. It didn't last. The calls became shorter, then less frequent, then conditional. Jenna began inserting herself into everything. If I asked Ryan a question, she answered. If I suggested a visit, she checked their schedule. If I offered help, she either accepted it without acknowledgement or declined it in a way that made it sound unnecessary. And then there were the financial questions, subtle at first. Do you still manage everything yourself, Baggy? Have you thought about simplifying your accounts? Passwords can be so hard to keep track of at our age. At our age, I was 67, Jenna was 41, there was no our age. That phrase wasn't just a comment, it was positioning, placing us in the same category, making my independence sound like a shared burden rather than a personal right. Ryan started asking questions too, not directly but enough. Dad had everything set up pretty complex, right? You ever think about consolidating it, making it easier? I brushed it off, smiled, changed the subject, but something inside me began to tighten. One Sunday after church, Pastor Jim Hawley pulled me aside in the hallway. Jim was a kind man respected in our community, the sort of person people trusted instinctively. He smiled at me, but his eyes were serious. Maggie Ryan spoke with me last week, he said. He's concerned about you. Says you've been a bit forgetful lately, misplacing things. He asked if maybe someone from the congregation could help you out around the house, check in on you. I looked at him steadily. Jim, last week I cooked for 14 people at the church fundraiser. I remember every name, every dish, every food allergy at that table. Did you see me forget anything? He paused. I'm just passing along what he said, Maggie. Then you should have asked me before you passed it along. I said it without raising my voice, but I didn't soften it either. He nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable, and we moved on to other things. On the drive home, I drove slower than usual, not because I was upset, because I was thinking. Ryan had spoken to Pastor Jim, had planted the idea that I was becoming forgetful, had done it with a man whose word carried weight in the community. That was not concern, that was groundwork. Then came Thanksgiving. It should have been simple, just dinner, family, but there was a tension that sat at the table with us like an uninvited guest present in every careful pause and every overly polished smile. Jenna was excessively pleasant, the kind of pleasantness that feels rehearsed. Ryan barely looked at me. Sophie was quieter than usual, watching her parents with a kind of confusion I recognized from my own reflection. After the meal, Ryan pulled me aside in the hallway. Mom, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, the way he always did when he was uncomfortable. We should probably go over some of Dad's paperwork soon, just to make sure everything's clear. Clear, another word that didn't sit right. We can talk about it later, I said. He nodded too quickly. Later that evening, while I was washing dishes, Jenna came into the kitchen and closed the door behind her. Her voice was light, but there was a direction to it, a destination she had already chosen before the conversation started. Maggie, I'll be direct, she said. You should think about selling off some of the rental properties. Simplify things. You don't need to manage this much at your age. I didn't look up from the sink. Who would manage the money from the sale? Family, she said, obviously. I turned off the water, dried my hands slowly, turned to face her. Henry left everything to me. He knew what he was doing, and so do I. Jenna smiled. But her eyes went cold for just a fraction of a second before she turned and walked out of the kitchen. And standing in the doorway behind her, watching silently, was Sophie. Her eyes moved from her mother's back to my face, and in that glance I saw something no 16-year-old should have to carry. Understanding. A week later, Jenna called with an invitation. "We've been thinking," she said, her voice warm and measured, "maybe we all need some time together, a little reset, a family trip." I hesitated. Just us. Of course, it would be good for Sophie, too. She misses you. That part I believed. And maybe that's why I said yes. Because I wanted to believe that whatever distance had grown between us could still be closed. That families don't unravel like this. That love, even strained love, could still hold if you just showed up and tried. I packed carefully, not just clothes. I packed my instincts. And I wore my cardigan, the one with the hidden phone stitched into the lining. "Always have a backup," Henry had said. The morning we left Texas, everything looked normal. That was the first lie. Ryan pulled up right on time, the engine already running. Jenna stepped out with that polished smile. Sophie came around from the back seat and hugged me, and the hug lasted longer than usual. "I'm glad you're coming, Grandma," she whispered. There was something in her voice. Relief, maybe? Or worry. I couldn't tell which. The first hour felt almost comfortable. Familiar highways giving way to open landscape. Sophie showed me photos on her phone, told me about school, about your friends, small things that reminded me she was still just a teenager trying to understand the world. Jenna controlled the music without asking anyone. Ryan drove with his hands tight on the wheel, his eyes flicking to the mirrors but never quite settling on me. I noticed that. People who have nothing to hide don't avoid eye contact. We stopped for lunch at a roadside diner. Laminated menus, coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since morning, a waitress who called everyone hung on. We sat in a booth. Ryan asked about the estate binder Henry had kept. "Did you bring it, Mom? Just in case?" "No," I said. "I didn't think I'd need it for a vacation." Jenna leaned in. "It's just that emergencies happen. It would be good to have everything accessible. Passwords, account info, medical directives." "I know where everything is," I said. "That's good. But if something were to happen—" "Nothing is going to happen," I said. Silence settled across the table. Under it, Sophie's knee pressed against mine. A small gesture, a signal without words. When we went back to the car, I noticed something that made every alarm in my body go quiet and sharp at the same time. I had left my purse on the seat when I went to the restroom inside the diner. When I returned, Jenna was standing by the car, putting her phone away quickly. Too quickly. I caught just a glimpse of the screen before it went dark. She had been photographing something inside my purse, my credit cards, my insurance information, my driver's license. She didn't know I saw. I didn't let her know. But I filed it away in the place where I was keeping everything now, the place that was getting fuller by the hour. By late afternoon, the landscape had shifted into something more open, more desolate. Long stretches of road with nothing but scrub and sky. The kind of place where distances feel longer than they are and help feels farther than it should. "We should probably stop soon," Jenna said. "Bathroom break, stretch, maybe grab coffee." "There's a station about 10 miles ahead," Ryan replied. When we pulled in, it looked like any other stop on a long drive. A few cars, a small convenience store, a restroom around the side of the building. Jenna turned in her seat. "Maggie, you can just leave your purse here. No need to carry everything in. Will only be a minute." Something inside me tightened. Not surprise, recognition. "My purse is fine," I said. She smiled. "It's safer in the car. You don't want to misplace anything. Ryan spoke up. It's okay, Mom. We'll be right here. Sophie looked at me. Her eyes moved between me and her parents, quick and uncertain. I studied them all for a moment. 3 faces, 1 family, and yet in that instant they felt like strangers wearing familiar masks. I set my purse down, not because I trusted them, because I wanted to see what would happen next. All right, I said softly. Take your time, Jenna replied. I stepped out of the car. The heat hit me immediately. The air smelled like gasoline and dust and something dry and ancient that had nothing to do with any of us. I walked toward the restroom, my steps steady, my mind running calculations I didn't want to be running. Inside, I stood in front of the mirror for a moment longer than necessary. The fluorescent light made everything look harsher, older, more exposed. Pay attention, I whispered to my reflection. I washed my hands, took a breath, opened the door, and walked out into silence. The SUV was gone, not rolling away in the distance, not circling the lot. Gone. The parking space sat empty, the asphalt still holding the faint dark outline of oil stains that had been there long before we arrived. For one terrible, disorienting second, my body refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I turned slowly, scanned the lot, the road, the horizon in both directions. Nothing, no familiar shape, no brake lights, no hesitation, just empty space, and my cane still leaning against the bench. The truth didn't arrive as a shock. It arrived as something quieter and far more devastating. A confirmation, because somewhere deep inside me, in the part I had been refusing to listen to, I had known. Not the specifics, not the plan, but the direction, the slow, deliberate drift toward this exact moment. This had been planned. Every question about my accounts, every suggestion to simplify, every comment about my age, every small moment that felt slightly wrong but not wrong enough to confront. It had all been leading here. I wasn't forgotten. I was removed. I walked to the bench and sat down, not from weakness, from the weight of understanding. My hands rested in my lap for a moment before I slipped one inside the lining of my cardigan and pulled out the prepaid phone. The screen lit up with a soft glow that felt almost unreal against the harsh desert light. I dialed Diane Pratt first, my financial advisor, one of the few people Henry had trusted completely. She answered on the third ring. Maggie, is everything all right? No, I said, it's not. I need you to listen carefully. I told her everything, briefly, clearly, the trip, the stop, the disappearance. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed, sharper, focused. Are you safe right now? I am. Good. Stay where you are. She paused. Maggie, there are red flags on your accounts. I should have pushed harder when I first noticed. My grip tightened. What flags? Multiple login attempts over the past 2 weeks. None successful but persistent. Targeted. Someone who knows enough about your information to try different entry points. It wasn't me. I know that now. Lock everything, I said. I'll call you back when I'm somewhere safe. The second call went to Glenn Harlan, retired state trooper, friend of Henry's for 30 years. The kind of man who listened first and acted second. Well now, he said, his voice warm but curious. That's a number I don't see often. Everything okay, Maggie? No, I need help. I gave him the gas station name and the highway marker. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. I'm about 45 minutes out. Stay visible. Don't go anywhere with anyone. I'm on my way. When that call ended, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not fear, not panic, clarity. The kind that comes when you stop hoping for a different version of what's happening and start dealing with the version that's real. I opened the email account Henry had made me keep separate from everything else, the one no one knew about. Notifications loaded instantly. Too many. My chest tightened as I scrolled. Messages from extended family, missed calls, and then I found it. A text from Ryan sent 20 minutes earlier. Mom wandered off at a gas station. We're looking for her. If anyone hears from her, please let us know. She's been confused lately. I read it 3 times, each time the words hit differently. Confused, wandered off, looking for her. There was another message in the family group thread. Please keep Maggie in your prayers. We're concerned she may be experiencing cognitive decline. We're doing everything we can. And then on social media, a public post from Jenna. Traveling with family right now and dealing with a difficult situation. Maggie seems to be having episodes of confusion and wandered off during a stop. We're worried and trying to get help. Please keep us in your thoughts. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Not from tears, from something else. Something deeper and steadier than sadness. They hadn't just left me. They had replaced my reality with a version that was easier for them to control, a version where I was unreliable, forgetful, declining, a woman who needed them to step in, who couldn't manage on her own. They weren't explaining my absence. They were defining it, building a story that would hold up long after this day was over. Because once a narrative like that takes root, it spreads. People believe what sounds reasonable. An elderly woman alone confused. It makes sense to anyone who doesn't know better. Except it wasn't true. And I had proof it wasn't true. Because I wasn't lost. I was watching. Then one more message arrived. Not in the group thread, not echoing her parents. A direct message from Sophie. Grandma, are you okay? My heart tightened. She hadn't repeated their story. She hadn't played along. She had come straight to me. I typed carefully. I'm safe. Don't say anything yet. Just listen and stay calm. A pause. 3 dots appeared. Then her reply. I heard them talking. Something's wrong. I closed my eyes for a moment. Yes, I thought, something is very wrong. In the distance, through the heat shimmer rising off the asphalt, I saw a familiar truck pulling into the station. Glenn, right on time. I stood up slowly, gripped my cane, steadied my posture. Not broken, not lost, not confused. As the truck rolled to a stop, I slipped the phone back into my cardigan and felt its weight settle against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Because whatever came next, I was no longer the woman they thought they had left behind. I was the woman Henry Ashford had spent 40 years preparing, and for the first time all day, that felt like exactly enough. Glenn Harlan did not rush. That was the first thing I noticed when he arrived. He parked carefully, cut the engine, and sat there for a few seconds, scanning the gas station lot the way a man does when he has spent most of his career reading situations before stepping into them. Only then did he open the door and walk toward me. Maggie, he said. His voice was low but firm. You all right? I will be, I answered. He studied my face, not just looking, assessing. You don't look confused to me. A small, humorless smile touched my lips. That's because I'm not. Good, let's get you out of here. We pulled out of that gas station and onto the highway, and I watched the place shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared entirely. That small, unremarkable stop would have been the end of the story if I had been the woman they believed I was. A confused old woman wandering in the desert, waiting to be found, and folded back into someone else's version of events. But I wasn't that woman, and now I was no longer alone. Glenn drove in silence for a few miles. The road stretched ahead of us flat and endless, the kind of landscape that makes you feel like time itself has slowed down. Then he spoke. Tell me everything from the beginning. So I did, slower this time, more deliberate. I walked him through every conversation that had felt slightly off, every glance that carried too much weight, every question about my finances that had been disguised as concern. I told him about the login attempts Diane had flagged, about the public posts, about Sophie's message. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He just listened the way a man listens when he already suspects the answer but needs to hear the whole question. When I finished, he let out a long, controlled breath. That's not impulsive behavior, he said. That's coordinated. I know. You got any idea what the end game is? Guardianship, I said. Conservatorship. They're trying to establish that I can't manage my own affairs, and they've already started building the case publicly. Glenn's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the road. That explains the social media posts. They're laying groundwork. We drove another few minutes in silence before I said something I hadn't told anyone yet. Something that surprised even me with how much it still weighed. After Henry passed, Ryan called me one night, about 1 in the morning. He was drunk. I could hear it in his breathing before he even spoke. Glenn glanced at me briefly. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I was never good enough." Just like that, out of nowhere. I paused, watching the desert roll past. I wanted to say so many things about how he didn't need to be perfect, about how proud I was of certain parts of him. But all I managed was, "You've always been enough for me." What did he say? Nothing. He hung up, called the next morning like nothing happened. Normal voice, normal conversation, and I let it go. I didn't bring it up. Glenn was quiet for a moment. You think that was a mistake? I think it was one of many moments where I chose comfort over honesty. And I think all those moments added up to this. You didn't create what your son chose to become, Maggie. I know, I said, but knowing that doesn't make it lighter. We arrived at Glenn's house just outside a small town about an hour from the gas station. It was modest and well kept with a wide porch and the kind of deep quiet that comes from years of routine. Inside, everything was orderly, not sterile but intentional. The home of a man who had lived alone long enough to make peace with it. Sit, he said, gesturing toward the kitchen table. I'll make coffee. I've had enough bad coffee for one day. This one's better, trust me. While Glenn moved around the kitchen, I pulled out the prepaid phone and sat at the table with a legal pad he had handed me without being asked. I began writing times, dates, conversations, even the smallest details, because Henry had taught me that small things are often what hold everything together in front of a judge. And then I called Diane. She answered immediately. Maggie, where are you? Safe with Glenn. Good. I've been working since we spoke. There was something heavier in her voice now, something she had been holding back. You were right to be concerned, but there's more. I straightened slightly. Go on. The login attempts I mentioned, they're just the beginning. This morning, about an hour after you would have stopped for gas based on the timeline, you gave me someone submitted a request to reset the credentials on the holding company tied to your rental properties. It didn't go through, but it triggered a review. They waited until I was out of the picture, I said. That's exactly what it looks like. I closed my eyes briefly. Is anything compromised? Your primary accounts are secure, but Maggie... She paused, and the pause told me everything before her words did. There's something that already happened. Something I should have caught sooner. My grip tightened on the phone. Tell me, there's a secondary savings account, the one Henry opened years ago for Sophie's college fund. Ryan was listed as co-owner from when Henry was alive, back when Henry intended Ryan to manage it on Sophie's behalf. I never changed that, I said quietly, because I hadn't. After Henry died, there were so many accounts, so many details, and that one had seemed safe. It was for Sophie. Ryan would never touch money meant for his own daughter. $38,000 was withdrawn 3 weeks ago, Diane said. The number landed like a physical weight on my chest. 38,000, I repeated. Sophie's college money. Yes. Silence stretched between us. Glenn had stopped moving in the kitchen. He stood perfectly still, watching me reading the conversation from my expression alone. So they're not just trying to take, I said. They've already taken. I'm afraid so, E.G. Where did it go? I'm tracing that now, but Maggie, there's also a pre-authorization inquiry tied to a trust distribution. It originated from a location in Sedona, Arizona. Sedona, right where Ryan and Jenna were headed. I ended the call and immediately turned to practical action. The image of Jenna photographing the contents of my purse at the diner flashed through my mind. Credit cards, insurance cards, my driver's license. She had copies of everything. I called Diane back within 30 seconds. Cancel my credit cards. Right now, all of them. Jenna has photographs of every card in my wallet. Diane processed it in under 3 minutes. 3 minutes between vulnerability and protection. It felt like the narrowest margin I had ever lived inside. Glenn set a mug of coffee in front of me. I wrapped my hands around it, feeling the warmth push back against something cold that had settled deep inside my bones, not fear. Something more permanent than fear. The understanding that this was real and that the people doing it shared my blood. The phone rang. Not a number I expected, not Diane, not Carol. Brenda Ashford, Henry's younger sister. 63 years old, retired school teacher, the kind of woman who sent birthday cards on time and remembered everyone's allergies at family gatherings. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. Maggie. Her voice carried concern, but underneath it, something else. A stiffness, like she had been coached. Brenda. Ryan called me. He said you wandered off at a gas station. He's worried sick. Are you all right? I didn't wander off, Brenda. They left me. Silence. Long enough to tell me she didn't know how to process that. Maggie, Ryan told me you've been having trouble lately, forgetting things, getting confused. He said it's been getting worse and that you might not even realize it's happening. There it was, the same narrative, the same carefully constructed version of me. But hearing it from Brenda, from Henry's own sister, made it cut differently, deeper. Brenda, I said, and my voice did not waver. I remember exactly who cooked for you 3 weeks straight when you had your knee surgery. I remember which room Henry kept every document in which account holds what, and the name of every tenant in every property we own. My memory is not the problem here. She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing, processing, trying to reconcile what Ryan had told her with the woman speaking to her now. I just want to help Maggie. Then don't help by believing them without asking me first. The call ended. I set the phone down on the table and for a moment I couldn't move. My hands trembled, not from fear, from something that hurt more than fear ever could. Because Ryan hadn't just built his story for strangers in social media. He had built it for family, for Henry's family. He had turned his father's own sister into a witness for a lie. Glenn watched me from across the table. How far has it spread? Far enough, I said. Brenda already believes him. Carol was efficient in a way that felt like armor. She laid out 3 immediate steps. Formal protective notices on all trust structures and associated entities. No changes, no transfers, no authorizations without direct verification from me. Documentation of intent based on everything that had happened today. And preparation for escalation, because if they were moving toward a formal meeting in Sedona with a notary consultant, they were not going to stop on their own. If you confront them too early, Carol warned, they'll pivot, deny everything, reframe the entire situation. I understand. We need evidence, solid, undeniable evidence. I have someone on the inside, I said, my granddaughter. Carol paused. That complicates things. She's a minor. We have to protect her too. No direct confrontation, no pressure. I won't put her at risk. Good. Have her document what she can safely. Conversations, papers, anything that shows intent, but nothing that puts her in danger. Carol added one more thing. I've engaged an investigator, Tom Kessler. He's already near Sedona. Good. And Maggie, I'm going to reach out to Brenda Ashford. I went still. Brenda just called me. She's on Ryan's side. She's on the side of the story she was told, Carol corrected. Give her a different story, one with evidence. Let me send her the photos of the forged documents once we have them confirmed. That was the difference between reacting and responding. Carol understood that Brenda wasn't an enemy. She was a resource who hadn't been given the right information yet. After the call, I messaged Sophie. Can you safely take photos of anything they're working on? Paper screens, anything with my name on it? Her reply came after a pause. I'll try. They're leaving for breakfast soon. I waited. Glenn sat across from me drinking his coffee in silence, offering nothing but his steady presence. Minutes passed, each one heavier than the last. Then the first image came through. I opened it. A hotel room table documents spread across it. Even in the slightly blurry photo, I could make out enough. Forms, affidavits, legal templates. My name typed neatly at the top of one page. And below it, a signature. Not mine, but close enough that someone who didn't know me might not question it. I stared at the documents on my phone screen, feeling something inside me harden into something I had never felt before. This wasn't just preparation on their part. This was execution. They weren't planning to ask my permission. They were planning to erase the need for it entirely. I typed back to Sophie, that's very important. Can you take more? I'll try. They just left for the restaurant downstairs. Another image arrived, then another. More documents, more language designed to reduce me to a name on a form, a problem to be managed, a woman who could no longer speak for herself. And then silence. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. I stared at the screen, my breath steady, but my fingers pressing harder into the edge of the phone. What is it? Glenn asked. Sophie stopped responding. 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I stood up from the table, though there was nowhere to go. Glenn put his hand flat on the table surface. Wait, he said, 6 minutes? Then the screen lit up. Mom came back to get her phone charger. I hid my phone under the pillow just in time. She asked what I was doing in the room alone. I told her I was FaceTiming a friend. She looked at me for a long time. Then she left. My lungs released air I hadn't realized I was holding. Are you okay? I typed. My hands are shaking, but she didn't see the photos. Stop. Don't take any more pictures. But you need them. I need you safe more than I need anything else. There was a pause, then I understand. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. Sophie, 16 years old, hiding a phone under a pillow. while her mother stood in the doorway studying her with suspicious eyes. The image made something inside me burn. Not anger at Jenna, though that was there. Something older. Guilt. Because Sophie was in that position because of choices I had made long before today. Every time I looked away, every time I smoothed things over, every time I chose peace instead of truth, all of it had led to this moment, to my granddaughter trembling in a hotel room, doing what the adults in her life should have done years ago. A few minutes later, Sophie sent another message. Mom asked Dad why I keep staying in the room. Dad said leave her alone, but Mom is still watching me. Jenna was getting suspicious. The window was narrowing. I looked down at the phone. The battery indicator in the corner read 4%. 4%. I had been using it continuously since the gas station. Calls to Diane Glenn Carroll, messages to Sophie, email, photos. The small device had carried everything today, and now it was dying. Problem, Glenn asked, reading my expression. 4% battery. I don't have a charger that fits. He opened the glove box of his truck keys, then a drawer near the kitchen counter, pulling out a tangle of old cables. He held up one. Check the connector. It matched. Luck, he said. Not luck, I replied. Henry used to say preparation looks like luck to people who don't prepare. He plugged it into a wall outlet and connected the phone. The screen flickered, then held. 2% now. It would climb, but slowly, and I needed it now. I made a choice. I typed one message to Sophie before the screen could die. What time are they meeting Neil? Her response came almost instantly. They moved it up. Today, not tomorrow. My pulse didn't quicken. It sharpened, like a lens being adjusted. Mom says everything changes after today, Sophie added. I typed fast, watching the battery hold at 3%. I'm coming to you. Don't react when you see me. Don't warn them. Just stay calm. Sent. The screen dimmed. I turned it off to preserve what was left and let the charger do its work. They moved the meeting up, I told Glenn. Today, not tomorrow. He leaned back slightly. Means they're accelerating. Or they sense pressure. People who are doing something wrong often rush the final step. They want it done before anything can interfere. Before you can interfere, Glenn said. Exactly. He looked at me for a long moment. Then you've got a decision to make. You can wait. Let Carol handle it through the legal system. Let the process catch up. Or you go there yourself. That's not really a question, Glenn. He nodded once. I didn't think it was. While the phone charged, I sat with the legal pad and wrote down everything I had learned in the past 4 hours. The timeline, the account access attempts, the 38,000 already taken, the forged documents Sophie had photographed, the meeting with Neil Burgess, the narrative being built on social media and through family contacts. Every piece laid out in sequence, each one connecting to the next like links in a chain that had been forged long before today. The phone reached 25%. I turned it on and called Carol. Tom Kessler is in position near the resort, she said. Protective notices have been filed. If they try to submit anything through official channels, it will trigger an immediate review. Good. There's something else, Carol added. I sent the photos of the forged documents to Brenda Ashford. I stopped writing. What was her reaction? 30 seconds of complete silence. Then she asked one question, what do I need to do? I closed my eyes. Brenda, the same woman who had called me 2 hours ago, convinced that I was losing my mind. She had seen the evidence, and it had changed something. She's driving to Sedona, Carol continued. She wants to see this for herself. I opened my eyes. She's coming. She's coming. Something shifted inside me. Not hope exactly, but the weight redistributed. Because now I was not the only person who knew the truth. And every person who saw the evidence was one more crack in the story Ryan and Jenna had built. Glenn grabbed his keys. Sedona's about 2 hours from here. We'll get there before they finish if we leave now. I stood up, slipping the phone into my cardigan. The weight of it against my ribs felt different now. Not like a secret, like a weapon. Not the kind that destroys, the kind that reveals. We stepped outside. The late afternoon air had cooled slightly, the sky shifting from white heat to something deeper, more layered. I paused on the porch for just a moment. 2 hours ago, I didn't know Ryan had stolen Sophie's college fund. 4 hours ago, I was standing in an empty parking lot with nothing but a cane and a hidden phone. And now I was driving straight into the center of everything they had tried to keep me away from. Glenn started the truck. The engine turned over with a low, steady rumble. "You ready?" he asked. I looked out at the road stretching ahead, the landscape already beginning to shift from flat desert scrub toward the red rock formations of northern Arizona. Somewhere at the end of that road, my son and his wife were sitting in a conference room with a man named Neil Burgess presenting forged documents with my name on them, telling a story about a woman who no longer existed. They believed they were walking toward control, toward a future where my voice had been quietly, permanently removed. They had no idea that the woman they left behind was now 2 hours away, carrying every piece of evidence they thought they had buried, with a retired state trooper beside her, a lawyer on the phone, an investigator already in position, and Henry's own sister driving from the opposite direction. "Ready," I said. Glenn put the truck in gear. The gravel crunched beneath us as we pulled onto the road. And for the first time since that morning, I was not afraid. Not because the danger had passed, but because I finally understood something Henry had tried to tell me years ago, something I had only now fully grasped. The people who plan against you always have one blind spot. They build their entire strategy around the version of you they need you to be. The weak version, the confused version, the version that stays where she's put. They never plan for the version that gets up. The resort appeared through the windshield like something out of a brochure. Polished stone walls catching the late afternoon light, wide glass windows reflecting the red rock formations behind us, manicured desert landscaping framing the entrance with the kind of careful beauty that made everything inside feel legitimate, trustworthy, controlled. The kind of place where people signed away their futures believing they were being responsible. Glenn pulled the truck into the parking area and turned off the engine. Neither of us moved immediately. We just sat there looking at the building, letting the weight of what was about to happen settle between us. "How do you want to do this?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "I don't walk in until they can't finish what they started." I pulled out the phone. 28% battery, enough. First, I emailed Diane. 2 words freeze everything. Her reply came in under a minute. "Already done. Full security hold. Nothing moves without your voice verification and a call back to a number only you and I know." Then I called Carol. "Tom Kessler is inside the resort," she said. "He checked in an hour ago under his own name. He's positioned near the conference wing. And Brenda, 20 minutes behind you based on her last update." I absorbed that. Brenda driving alone across Arizona, carrying the photographs of forged documents bearing my name. The same woman who just hours ago had told me on the phone that Ryan was worried about me, that I might be losing my grip. Now she was racing to see the truth for herself. "One more thing," Carol said. I need you to understand something before you go in there. Whatever happens in that room, do not let them pull you into an emotional confrontation. Let them talk. Let them explain. Let them dig. You want them to incriminate themselves. I want them to say out loud what they've been doing in silence. Once spoken, it becomes testimony. I understand. I ended the call and sat for a moment watching the entrance. A couple walked out holding brochures, smiling, discussing something about property trusts. Normal people making normal decisions about their normal lives. They had no idea what was unfolding 2 hallways away from whatever seminar they had just attended. I picked up the phone one final time and called the resort front desk. "Good afternoon," the receptionist answered. "My name is Margaret Ashford. I believe there may be a situation involving identity misuse connected to a meeting currently taking place on your property. My legal representative has flagged potential fraudulent documentation involving individuals who are on site right now." A pause. Her tone shifted from hospitality to caution. "Would you like me to notify management?" "Yes, discreetly." "Of course, ma'am." I hung up and looked at Glenn. Now we wait. For what? For the ground to start shifting under them before I ever walk through that door. Minutes passed, not many but enough, the kind of time that stretches when everything is about to become irreversible. My phone buzzed. Sophie. They're still in the conference room. Neil keeps asking questions. He asked why everything feels rushed. Mom is getting angry. "What about your dad?" I typed. A pause, then he looked scared. That word sat with me. Scared, not determined, not calculating. Scared. Because somewhere beneath everything Ryan had allowed himself to become, there was still the boy who had cried in his old bedroom after the shop failed. Still the man who had called me at 1 in the morning and said he was sorry. Fear meant he knew. He had always known. He just hadn't been strong enough to stop. Another message from Sophie. "Grandma Aunt Brenda is in the lobby. I just saw her." Brenda, already here. "Stay where you are," I typed. "Don't go inside the conference room. Don't let them see you watching." "Okay," I turned to Glenn. "It's time." He nodded once. We got out of the truck. The lobby doors opened without resistance and cool air washed over me, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and something citrus. Clean, designed, a space where nothing messy was supposed to happen. I walked the way I always walked, steady, unhurried, because the moment I appeared uncertain or distressed, I would become exactly the woman they had described to everyone, and I refused to give them that. Glenn stayed close but slightly behind, not hiding, not leading, present. "Conference rooms are down that hall," he said quietly. We moved forward. The carpet absorbed our footsteps. The hallway stretched ahead, doors on either side, each one closed, each one containing someone else's business, someone else's decisions. At the end of it, mine. My phone vibrated. Sophie again. "They're coming out." I stopped. Glenn glanced at me. "They're leaving the room," I said. He shifted his position slightly, angling himself just behind my right shoulder. "Then we don't go to them." "They come to me," I finished. Neil Burgess came out first. Mid-40s professional suit, but his expression had changed from whatever it had been when the meeting started. The confidence was gone. In its place was the particular discomfort of a man who had just realized that the ground beneath him was not as solid as he had been promised. He adjusted his jacket with short, distracted movements and took 2 steps into the hallway before stopping. Behind him, Jenna. Her posture was rigid, controlled, but I could see what others might miss. The tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set just slightly too tight. The composure was there, but it was costing her more than usual to maintain. Then Ryan, and something in me shifted when I saw him. He looked diminished, not physically smaller, but something inside him had folded inward, collapsed into itself the way a structure does when the support beams have been removed. He walked with his eyes down his hands at his sides, his whole body carrying the particular heaviness of a man who knows he has crossed a line he cannot uncross. And finally, Sophie. She emerged last, staying a few steps behind her parents. Her eyes found mine immediately across the length of the hallway. For a fraction of a second, everything else disappeared. The resort, the hallway, the legal strategies, all of it fell away, and there was only my granddaughter looking at me with an expression that held relief and fear and hope in equal measure. Then she looked away, exactly as I had asked. Good girl. Jenna saw me next. The change was instantaneous. Her body stopped mid-step. Her face lost its composure for exactly 1 second. Not long, but long enough for me to see what was underneath. Shock, then calculation, then the rapid assembly of a new response. Ryan followed her gaze. When his eyes reached mine, the color drained from his face so completely that for a moment he looked like a man who had seen something impossible. Mom. The word barely formed. I did not respond immediately. I let the silence sit. Let it fill the space between us. Let it do what silence does when the truth is standing in the middle of it with nowhere to hide. Jenna recovered first. Of course she did. She stepped forward and her voice lifted with sudden urgency, sudden warmth, sudden concern that arrived so quickly it could only have been manufactured. Maggie, oh my God, we've been so worried. We've been looking everywhere for you. We thought you wandered off and we drove up and down that Highway 4. No, I said, one word, soft, but it stopped her like a wall. She froze. The mask slipped again, not all the way, but enough. Ryan stepped forward, his hands rising slightly as if reaching for something he couldn't find. Mom, we were looking for you. You walked off and we didn't know where. I walked into a restroom, I said evenly. That is not wandering off. Silence. He swallowed visibly. That's not what we thought happened, he managed. That's not what you told people happened, I corrected. Another silence. He looked at Jenna. Jenna did not look back. Neil Burgess shifted uncomfortably several feet away, glancing between all of us with the expression of a man rapidly recalculating his involvement in something he had been told was routine. I think I should probably step away, he started. You should stay, I said, turning my gaze to him. He froze. You were about to participate in something involving my name, my assets, and my legal identity. I believe you deserve to understand exactly what that involves. Jenna stepped forward again. Sharper now. The warmth was gone. This is inappropriate. You're misunderstanding the situation. No, I said again, and this time my voice carried something different. Not louder, but heavier. The weight of every document Sophie had photographed. Every login attempt Diane had flagged. Every dollar that had already been stolen. I reached into my cardigan and pulled out the phone. Not hidden anymore. Not a secret. Visible. While you were in that room explaining my condition to this man, I said, glancing at Neil, I was reading your messages. Every one of them. Ryan's breath caught audibly. You told people I was confused, I continued, that I wandered off, that I was experiencing cognitive decline. You posted it publicly. You told it to family. You told it to my pastor. That's what we believed was happening, Jenna said quickly. No, that is what you needed other people to believe. I held up the phone and showed Neil the photographs, the documents, the forged signature. My name at the top of forms I had never seen, never agreed to, never authorized. His eyes moved across the screen quickly, and I watched his expression shift from discomfort to something much colder. Recognition of what he had almost been part of. This was not disclosed to me, he said carefully. No, I replied. It wasn't. Jenna turned on him. Those aren't finalized documents. That's preliminary work. Drafts. They have her signature, Neil said, which is not mine, I added. Neil straightened his jacket one final time. I'm removing myself from this situation entirely, and I strongly advise all parties to seek proper legal counsel before involving any further documentation. He walked away. No argument, no negotiation, just the quiet, deliberate exit of a man protecting himself from liability. Jenna watched him go. Her jaw tightened, her hands clenched at her sides. And for the first time since I had known her, I saw the control break. Not into tears, into fury. You think you've accomplished something here, she said, turning back to me. You think showing up and making a scene changes anything? I think you've lost something, I replied. What control? The word landed harder than anything else in that hallway, because it was not emotional, it was factual, and she knew it. You don't understand the pressure we've been under, she said, her voice rising now, the polish wearing away with every sentence. The financial strain, the responsibility of managing everything while you sit in that house pretending nothing needs to change. Then you should have asked me for help, I said. Instead, you decided to take what wasn't yours. It wasn't taking, it was managing. You weren't capable of handling it anymore. Name one example, I said. One real specific instance where I demonstrated that I could not manage my own affairs. Silence. Her eyes searched, not for truth, for ammunition, and found nothing she could fire. That's what I thought, I said. And then a voice came from behind us, small, clear, steady in a way that made everyone in that hallway stop breathing. She didn't wander off, Sophie. She stood a few steps back, her hands trembling at her sides, but her eyes were fixed and certain. Every head turned toward her. She didn't wander off, Sophie repeated louder now. Mom, you told her to leave her purse in the car. You told her to sit on the bench, and then Dad drove away. I was in the back seat. I watched it happen. Sophie, Jenna's voice was sharp and immediate. You don't understand what... I heard everything, Sophie said, and her voice did not break. I heard you tell Dad the money would be easy. I heard Dad say we just need to get through today. I heard you on the phone with Neil 2 days ago going over what to say about Grandma's condition. Ryan looked at his daughter, and something in him shattered visibly, not because of me, not because of the law or the evidence or the investigator who was somewhere nearby, because his 16-year-old daughter was standing in a hotel hallway, looking him in the eye and telling the truth he had been running from. How did you, he started, because I'm not blind, Dad. Her voice cracked for the first time, but she kept going. And because Grandpa taught me that paperwork tells the truth when nobody else is around to tell it, that's why I took pictures of everything on that table. The hallway went completely silent. Ryan opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes filled, and for the first time I saw not the man who had left me at a gas station, but the boy who used to bring me dandelions. The boy who had cried behind a closed door that I never opened. He was still in there, buried under years of failure and shame and choices that had each seemed small at the time but had built one on top of another into something he could no longer carry. I owe money, Mom, he said. His voice was barely audible. More than I can pay back. How much? I asked. He couldn't meet my eyes. A man named Dale Crenshaw, private lender, high interest. I thought I could pay it back if you took control of my assets, I finished. Dale threatened me, Ryan continued, and now his voice was shaking. Said he'd come to the house, said he'd go after everything. I didn't know what to do. So you went after me instead. He flinched, and then he said something I was not expecting. Jenna found a way. He glanced at his wife, and for the first time in all the years I had known them together, he did not look to her for permission. He looked at her with something else entirely. She said if we could establish that you weren't competent, we could access the trust, manage the properties, pay off everything and start over. She said it would be clean. Shut up, Jenna snapped. You're making this worse. She told me the documents were standard, Ryan continued, ignoring her, that the signature was just a placeholder, that we'd get your real one later. I didn't know it was already submitted to Neil as final. Stop talking, Jenna said, right now. But Ryan didn't stop. He looked at me and his face held something I had not seen in years. Not since that night he called at 1 a.m. Not since the shop closed. Maybe not since he was a boy. I'm sorry, Mom. I let this happen. I was too scared and too weak to stop it. Jenna turned away from him with visible disgust, her arms crossed tightly, her jaw locked. And in that single gesture, I understood their marriage more clearly than I ever had. Ryan was not her partner. He was her instrument, and the instrument had just broken in her hands. A voice came from the end of the hallway. Actually, this is exactly what we needed to hear. We all turned. There's documented abandonment of a vulnerable adult, Tom continued evenly, as if she hadn't spoken. Digital misrepresentation of cognitive capacity. Attempted unauthorized access to protected financial accounts. Forged legal documents, and based on what I've just heard, a voluntary admission of participation. He looked at Ryan. Ryan said nothing. This situation is now formally under review, Tom said. I strongly advise everyone present to cease any further attempts to process or present documentation related to Margaret Ashford's assets or legal standing. Movement at the far end of the hallway caught my attention. Brenda. She stood near the corner, partly in shadow, watching everything. I didn't know how long she had been there, long enough judging by her expression. She walked forward slowly, past Tom, past Neil's empty chair, past Jenna, who stiffened as Brenda passed, and she stopped beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there shoulder to shoulder with me, facing her nephew and his wife. The positioning said everything her voice hadn't yet. Then she spoke, quietly, almost to herself, except that every person in that hallway heard it. My brother would never have forgiven this. Ryan closed his eyes. Jenna looked at all of us, at Tom, at Brenda, at Sophie, at me. And I watched the last remnants of her strategy collapse behind her eyes. There was no angle left, no narrative to construct, no version of events she could spin. The audience she had been performing for was gone, and in its place stood people who had seen the documents, heard the admissions, and were not going to look away. This isn't over, she said. Yes, I replied quietly. It is. Nobody moved for a long time after that. Tom Kessler spoke with Glenn briefly near the exit. Papers were exchanged. Contact information recorded. The machinery of accountability began turning in the way it does slowly at first, then with the kind of momentum that doesn't reverse. We did not leave the resort together. That felt important, There was no final scene where the family walked out as one, no tearful reconciliation in the parking lot, no quiet understanding reached over cooling coffee. Instead, everything fractured into separate directions. Ryan sat down on a bench in the hallway with his head in his hands. Jenna walked toward the elevator without looking back. Sophie stayed where she was, watching her parents divide her face, carrying the particular weight of someone who had just learned that doing the right thing does not always make you feel better. I went to her first. "You did the right thing," I said softly. She nodded, her eyes filling, but not spilling over. "I know," she whispered, "but it doesn't feel like it." "It will," I said. "Not today, but it will." Brenda stood nearby waiting. When Sophie stepped back, Brenda looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Regret, maybe. For the phone call, for believing the wrong version of events, for not asking me directly before assuming. "I'm sorry, Maggie," she said. "You came," I replied. "That's what matters." She nodded slowly, and then she did something unexpected. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, old, creased many times over. "Henry gave me this," she said, "years ago before he got sick. He told me to keep it and not to read it unless something happened to you that didn't feel right." I took the paper from her hand, unfolded it carefully. Henry's handwriting, neat, precise, unmistakable. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. "Brenda, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Maggie is stronger than anyone gives her credit for, but strength alone isn't enough when the threat comes from inside the family. Watch Ryan. Not because he's bad, but because he's weak. And weakness left unchecked becomes something dangerous. Help Maggie. She won't always ask." I read it twice, then folded it closed and held it against my chest for a moment before putting it in my cardigan pocket beside the phone. Henry had known, not suspected, known, and he had planted safeguards not just in bank accounts and legal documents, but in people. In Brenda, in me, in the quiet preparations that looked excessive until the day they saved everything. Glenn drove me home that evening. The sun set behind us as we headed east, painting the sky in colors I would normally have admired. But my eyes stayed on the road ahead. There was nothing behind me I needed to look at anymore. "You held your ground," Glenn said after a while. "I didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice. You just made the right one." We drove the rest of the way in a silence that felt different from every silence that had come before it. Not empty, not tense, settled. When I stepped into my own house that night and set my keys on the kitchen counter, the familiar space wrapped around me with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. Maybe longer. The walls, the furniture, the small details Henry had chosen, they all stood exactly where they had always stood. Unchanged, unmoved, unlike everything else. "You want me to stay?" Glenn asked from the doorway. "No," I said gently. "I need to be here on my own." He nodded. "Call me if anything changes." "I will." The door closed behind him and I was alone. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, alone did not feel like a problem. It felt like a choice. The next morning, things began moving. Carol called with updates, protective orders fully in place, preliminary filings submitted. Ryan was cooperating. Jenna was not. The $38,000 had been traced to Dale Crenshaw's accounts and there was a path to partial recovery. Sophie's college fund would be reestablished under my name as sole owner. Ryan sent a text. "I'm sorry." 2 words, then another. She told me it would fix everything. I read both messages. I did not reply. Not out of cruelty, not out of punishment, but because I had spent too many years responding to Ryan, fixing things, softening consequences, making space for him to avoid the weight of his own decisions. And now I was done doing that. Not forever, maybe, but for now. Sophie arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I saw her from the window standing at the end of the walkway, gathering herself before approaching the door. I opened it before she could knock. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. Tight, real, not careful, not uncertain. The kind of hug that says everything language can't carry. I was afraid you wouldn't want to see me, she said. There is nothing you have done or could do that would make me turn you away, I told her. And I meant it with every part of me that was still intact. We made tea, sat at the kitchen table. She told me about home, the silence between her parents. Ryan sitting in the living room staring at nothing. Jenna making phone calls behind closed doors, still believing she could rearrange the outcome. I don't want to be like them, Sophie said quietly. You're not. How do you know? Because when it mattered, you chose the truth, and you chose it knowing it would cost you something. That's not what they did. She was quiet for a moment, turning her mug slowly between her hands. Then she looked up. The $38,000, that was for me. Your grandfather set it aside the month you were born. She looked down again. The weight of that knowledge moved across her face visibly. Her own father had taken money her grandfather had saved for her future and used it to pay off a debt he had hidden from everyone. I'll earn my own way if I have to, she said. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. You won't have to. Your grandfather left that money for you, and I will make sure it reaches you. That is not negotiable. She nodded and something in her eyes shifted. Not resolution exactly. Trust. The particular kind of trust that forms when someone proves through action and not words that they will protect what matters. The next morning, I took her to a place Henry used to love. A quiet overlook just outside of town where the land stretched wide and unbroken, the horizon reaching so far you could almost believe you were looking at the edge of the world itself. Henry used to come here when he needed to think clearly, when the noise of daily life made it hard to hear what mattered. We stood side by side looking out. It's beautiful, Sophie said softly. It is. For a while we just stood there, letting the quiet fill the spaces that words couldn't reach. Do you wish none of it happened? She asked. I thought about that carefully, honestly. No, I said. She looked surprised. Because if it hadn't happened, I continued, I might still be living inside something that wasn't real. I would still be making excuses, still looking away, still choosing comfort over truth. And eventually that would have cost me everything anyway, just more slowly. She absorbed that. Then do you think Dad will ever understand what he did? I think he already understands, I said. Whether he can live with that understanding is something only he can decide. And Mom, I looked out at the horizon. People who need control don't let go of it easily. Your mother may never see this the way you and I do, and that has to be okay, because we cannot wait for other people to understand before we move forward. Sophie was quiet for a long time after that, but it was not the uncomfortable silence of things left unsaid. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people have said exactly enough. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed in the guest room, I sat alone in the living room. The house was still around me. The clock ticked on the wall the way it had for 20 years. Henry's chair sat in the corner, where it always sat empty, but not absent. I stood and walked to his old study, opened the bottom drawer of his desk, and there beneath folders and envelopes, in the meticulous records of a life carefully documented, I found what I somehow knew would be there: a small leather notebook. Henry's handwriting on every page. Notes to himself mostly, reminders, calculations. But the last page, the very last thing he had written in a hand that shook but did not falter, was addressed to me. Maggie, everything I built, every system, every safeguard, every backup, none of it was because I didn't trust you. It was because I knew what was coming. I saw it in Ryan before he saw it in himself. Not cruelty, never that, but a kind of weakness that bends toward whoever pushes hardest. And I was afraid of who might push him. I couldn't protect you from this while I was alive because naming it would have broken something between us that I couldn't bear to break. So I protected you the only way I knew how. With systems, with structure, with preparation you might never need but that I could not risk you not having. Don't blame yourself for not seeing it sooner. You loved him the way a mother loves. That's not blindness, that's grace. But now if you're reading this, the time for grace is over and the time for strength has come. You have always been strong enough, Maggie. You just didn't always know it. I did. Henry. I held the notebook for a long time. My hands trembled, but not the way they had at the gas station. Not from shock or fear or the cold weight of betrayal. This trembling came from somewhere deeper, from the place where love and grief and understanding all meet and become something you can't name but can feel in every part of your body. I didn't let them, I said aloud to the empty room, to the chair, to the desk, to whatever part of Henry still lived in the walls of this house and the structure of everything he had built around me. I didn't let them. I closed the notebook, placed it back in the drawer, and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was dark and the street was quiet. Somewhere far away, Ryan was sitting with the consequences of his choices. Jenna was behind a closed door, still trying to rearrange a reality that would no longer bend to her will. And Sophie was asleep in the next room, carrying more courage in her 16 years than most people find in a lifetime. I stood there for a long time, watching the darkness, feeling the stillness of a house that was finally honest. They thought leaving me at that gas station would erase me from the story. They thought silence and distance and a carefully constructed lie would be enough to rewrite who I was and what I was worth. They thought the woman they left on that bench would stay there confused and helpless, waiting for someone to come and tell her what had happened to her own life. But Henry Ashford did not marry a woman who stays where she is put. He married a woman who gets up, and he spent his last years making sure that when the time came, she would have everything she needed to stand. Not whole yet, not healed. Those things take time, and I am old enough to know that some wounds close slowly and some leave marks that never fully fade. But I was standing, clear-eyed, undeceived, and surrounded by the people who had chosen truth when it cost them something to choose it. That was enough, not because it solved everything, but because it was real. And after so many months of living inside a lie I couldn't see, real was the only thing I wanted. I turned from the window, walked to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and phone calls and difficult conversations. Tomorrow the slow work of rebuilding would begin in earnest. Tomorrow I would have to decide what kind of relationship, if any, was possible with my son. But tonight the kettle hummed. The house was quiet. The cardigan hung on the back of a kitchen chair, the small phone still tucked inside its lining, still charged, still ready. A backup I no longer needed to hide. And Margaret Ashford sat down at her kitchen table, wrapped her hands around a warm mug, and breathed.